Hey darlings, it's Alora. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read and completed in the month of May. So I actually did a lot of reading this month. I read 11 books. One of them was a novella, but also I read one of the books twice, so 11-ish. That's definitely a few more books than I typically read in any given month, but I think that it was because I moved apartments, and so I was listening to a lot of audiobooks while I was doing things like carrying boxes up and down stairs and packing things up and moving things around and putting together furniture and things like that. So I had a lot of time where I had my hands busy but my mind free, and so I listened to quite a few audiobooks, which you'll see as we go through the books. So the first book that I completed in the month of May was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Now I have read The Night Circus before, so this was a reread for me, and I did actually listen to this book on audiobook. For the few of you who don't know, The Night Circus is this delicious, dark, winding, enchanting, magical realism book. Or maybe it's a low fantasy book. It has magic in it, but it's also set in the real world, so I guess low fantasy. Following two main characters and a plethora of side characters who are participating in this magical competition that culminates in this just incredibly imaginative circus. I would absolutely say that the strong suit of this book are Morgenstern's descriptions. She has such lush and rich settings, and the way in which she describes the settings is just magic. It's incredible, and it's so detailed, and you just feel like you're there. You feel like you can smell the caramel apples and that you are just participating in this experience. And so if you have not read this book, I would highly recommend it. And also, a side note, the audiobook is narrated by the same man, Jim Dale, I believe, who narrated all of the Harry Potter books. So he has this great British accent, and it's just really nostalgic if you listen to Harry Potter books on audio. 5 out of 5 stars. The second book that I completed in the month of May was Again But Better by Christine Riccio. She is probably one of the very biggest booktubers pulling bananas books. Her journey to writing this novel has been chronicled on YouTube over the past 3-ish years or so, and I was really looking forward to this book coming out. And within, I think, 2 days of it coming out, I downloaded the audiobook and listened to it. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that it was very interesting. It follows a main character who is a little bit older than a typical YA main character, which I loved. She's in college. She feels like she hasn't done the first few years of college right. She feels like she hasn't made friends and that she hasn't done all of these social things that other people have done, and it makes her feel behind and it makes her feel inadequate. And so she decides to go on a study abroad program to London, and that's kind of the launching point for this book, about her trying to start over in this new country and do it again, but better. The third book that I finished in May is something I'm super proud of because I've been working on it for a while, and that is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a standalone, you heard that right, it's a standalone fantasy novel, which is just incredible in and of itself. It's huge. It's over 800 pages, and it took me forever and a freaking day to finish it, but I really did enjoy my time reading it. It follows these two separate kingdoms, the East and the West, who hate each other. They don't communicate with each other. They barely trade with each other. And it's because there was this central event that happened in their history, and each of these continents or countries created their own separate religions based upon the events that occurred, but they have completely different ideas about what happened and what the meaning of the event was. And so they hate each other now because they just can't agree on the religious tenets and the religious significance of this event. And so it's the story of all of these people coming together. Some of them have magic, some of them don't. The story has dragons in it. They're all trying to find a solution to this central problem of something dark coming back into the world, and they're trying to solve the problems individually, and some of the people want to try to solve the problems together, and it's just such a political novel, and it was such a great time. I did feel a little bit detached from many of the characters. I feel like the characterization could definitely have been better, and that would have improved my enjoyment of the book. But overall, I still did really enjoy it. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I listened to the audiobook for Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. I knew nothing about Rachel Hollis before I listened to the audiobook, but I knew that this book had been getting a lot of buzz in the last year or so, and I'm a sucker for female self-empowerment, self-improvement, psychology, self-help type books. And so I definitely wanted to jump on that bandwagon with this book. And so I finally did. I finally listened to it on audiobook. I really did enjoy it. I feel like it was probably a 4.25, 4.5 star read for me. There was a lot of interesting information, and I really liked her voice. And the great thing was that Rachel Hollis actually narrated her own audiobook, and so you really felt connected to her. You felt like she was speaking to you directly, and she's a very good speaker. She does public speaking gigs all over the place all the time, and so I just felt like it was a really solid book, and there was definitely some advice in there that I'd heard before but that I hadn't thought of in a while. And she really kind of gave you the tough love version of it, where she's like, girl, you got to get your act together, you have to do better, and you have to change if you want your life to change. And I really did appreciate the message, but she also delivered it with love. It was like a sisterly feeling. And so I really liked this book, and I ended up listening to it twice on audiobook, just because I had no more audiobook credits because I'd been listening to so many audiobooks. And so I just kept it downloaded on my phone and replayed it from start to finish again. I definitely tend to like this kind of book because it gives you little pep talks throughout your day. You're driving to work, you're listening to this audiobook, she's talking about setting boundaries or saying no, or a myriad of different topics related to improving yourself and improving your life, and it was just really pep talky. After that, I read a hard-hitting YA contemporary that's sort of magical realism, or maybe surrealism a little bit, and it was called The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X. Arpan. I've heard about this book also for about a year on BookTube. It's been making the rounds, and I had it in my Amazon wish list for quite a while before I eventually purchased it. I'm really glad I did. I feel like this was a solid 4.5 star read also. I had a good reading month, guys. But this book follows a young girl whose mother has recently committed suicide, and that's heavy. So from the start of this book, this girl truly believes that this big red bird that she is seeing is her mother's spirit. She ends up traveling to Taiwan, where her maternal grandparents live, and going on this journey, this quest to try to figure out what her mother in this bird form is trying to tell her, and why her mother was so unhappy, and what had happened in her life that led to this tragic, just horrific, terrible event. This was a really solid book about grief and art and family and cultural adaptation, really just this idea of navigating a world in which your parents come from drastically different cultures, and you live in one of those cultures and you know almost nothing about the other, and just trying to understand the perspective of your parent who came from a completely different world, who came from a completely different background, and how that affected their attitude, their perspective, their life choices, and their feelings about the world. This was very sad. It was also very strange, and I wasn't sure. I don't know much about Taiwanese culture or legends or beliefs, but I'm not sure if a lot of the surrealist aspects of this book are based in Taiwanese culture, or if they really were just more magical realism elements. But I found the interplay to be really interesting, and I also really appreciated that this book had two intertwining timelines. So it wove the past before her mother died with the present after her mother had died, and then really tied everything together quite nicely. If all that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend giving it a try. I think it will be worth your time. After that, I listened to the audiobook for With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. I liked this book. I did not love this book. I feel like this book had a lot of important messages. It follows this multiracial teenage girl who has a daughter of her own and is struggling with the idea of whether or not she should go to college or whether she should just get a job to support her family, and all of the changes that occur when you finish high school and have to go out on your own. For her, there was the added responsibility of having this daughter and having to take care of another life and take her daughter into consideration when making these decisions. So it wasn't just about her and whether she should chase her passion or whether she should take a safe route. It really also came down to what would be the best for this other human life that she had decided to take care of and raise. There was a romance in this book that to me felt a little bit cheesy, and there were some elements sprinkled in, like magic dust sprinkled in, and I was really confused because it wasn't enough magic to make it a magic realism book, but it wasn't not there. Like, it was definitely there, but super subtle, and I personally didn't really jive with that, so it wasn't my favorite, but I still did think that, like I said, that the topics that it discussed were very important and not discussed enough. I think it was really interesting how in the book she talks about her cultural and racial heritage and how she's oftentimes seen as one thing when she really feels like she's more than one thing, and that she has more than one cultural identity, but one is shouted out the most and one is noticed the most. And so I thought that that was very interesting. It also deals with topics of multi-generational families living together and familial abandonment and how that has played into her own parenting. It deals with young motherhood. And so I really do believe that this is a book that would be helpful and illuminating for a lot of people who just don't consider these topics and don't think about it. But I just wish that the execution was a little bit different. After that, I read a book by the queen of romance novels, Colleen Hoover. I read All Your Perfects, which is one of her newer books. I think that she has a newer book than this out. She pops them out like once a year, and I love that. But Colleen Hoover has always been an author for me that has been very easy to get into. For whatever reason, her writing just flows. It is kind of smutty, but it doesn't feel crappy. It doesn't feel like romance for the sake of romance. It feels like romance for the sake of character development and understanding relationships and human dynamics, and I've always really appreciated that. So this is definitely an adult novel. There are a lot of things in here that could trigger a lot of people or offend a lot of people, but also it had this really fantastic story about this woman and her husband and their marriage problems that are related to her infertility. And that was something that I have read a few books about it, but I haven't read enough about it, and I really appreciated another perspective on it, and just seeing how a lack of communication in a marriage can really destroy it from the root system, and how bringing that communication back into the marriage and back into the relationship can shift things sometimes. And this also had a multiple timeline situation going on, where there was a before timeline when the couple was just meeting and falling in love, and then there was the after timeline when they were really in this dark place in their marriage. I think I gave this book a 5 stars. I really did like it. It was easy to read and it felt interesting, and I cared about the characters. Just remember, there's a content warning here. After that, I read a book that was kind of disappointing, and that was The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. Victoria Schwab is one of my favorite authors. I buy and read everything that she puts out, and this is a book that was her first published work that was recently reprinted, repackaged, and published again in the last few months. It feels like she was trying to create a fairy tale atmosphere, but it was not complex enough. It was very simplistic. It felt like it had the simplistic nature of a middle grade book with older content, and it felt very rushed. To me, it just felt like you could tell she had less experience writing, and I didn't like the characters very much. I definitely didn't care about the characters. I was really just trying to get through this and get to the end of it, which is sad, and I don't like saying that, especially about an author who I love and support unconditionally, but I just didn't like it. Maybe it's for some people. I wouldn't discount it. I would give it like a 3 stars. I just personally didn't vibe with it. However, at the back of this book, there's about a 100-page novella called The Ashbourne Boy that gave a backstory to one of the characters in this book, and she'd written that several years after writing The Near Witch, and it was much better. I really liked it. It was a different perspective, and the writing was more solid. It was more nuanced, more interesting. She didn't start every single sentence with I or the. You start to notice when an author starts every sentence with the subject of the sentence, but by the time she wrote The Ashbourne Boy, she really had developed her writing style a lot more, and it sounds almost the exact same as a lot of her current books. So I did enjoy The Ashbourne Boy. I gave that like a 4.5 stars, and I gave The Near Witch like a 2.5 or 3. The last 2 books that I read in the month of May were both audiobooks. The first one was Girls Stop Apologizing by Rachel Hollis. Now, we already talked about Rachel Hollis quite a bit, but this is her newest release. I would say it's a companion book to Girl Wash Your Face, but this is more focused on women in business and women following their dreams and women not being afraid to have a career even if they have a family. And I personally don't have I was going to say I don't have a family. I do have a family, but I don't have a husband or a wife or kids or anything like that. I'm coming at it from a different perspective, certainly, but I could still really appreciate a lot of the information that she put in there, and she was really no nonsense about it. She was like, you just have to do this thing. If you're going to create a business and create a career for yourself, you can't mess around, especially if you do have the added responsibility of a family. You can't waste time. And I think that her message in a lot of it was that many people waste time talking about their dreams and not taking action on them. And that if you really want to have it all, as it were, a family and a career, you have to not waste time. You have to just like get down to it. And she gave you a lot of practical tips and tools for how to advance your business, how to advance your career. But I think that most of it really was psychological. A lot of it really was how to get your mindset straight so that you can do the things that you want to do in your career and for yourself. We're almost done, guys. The final book that I read in May was Daisy Jones and the Six. This is one that I have been seeing all over BookTube. It's been plastered left and right, and I kind of didn't want to read it because I'm not that interested in musicians. This is an interview style book about this very popular band in the 70s and why they ended up parting ways and disbanding. Like I said, I definitely wasn't very hyped about this book. I did read Evelyn Hugo, or The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, a few months ago and did enjoy it. I didn't love it to pieces, but I liked Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing style, and I thought that the way in which she told a story was very interesting. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll read this newest book of hers that everybody's talking about. And so I listened to it on audiobook because the audiobook is full cast. It's amazing. It has Judy Greer in it and Benjamin Bratt and a bunch of other great people. I really liked the people that they chose for most of the characters in the audiobook, and I thought that that definitely added to the experience. I ended up giving this book a 4.5 stars. I was crying just a little bit by the end of it, and the characterization is amazing. You understand all of these different people's perspectives on what happened, and it was really interesting having the interview perspective because oftentimes people had completely different understandings of what happened at a certain time in the band's history, and so they would give their account of it, they would give their story, and somebody else would have a completely opposite or just different view on what happened. And it was really interesting that she brought that human element to it where it wasn't all consistent and everybody was agreeing on what happened. Ultimately, I think that this book was very well done, and it made me care about the band, even though I don't really invest myself that much in musicians and their careers, but it made me care, and I can applaud her for that. Okay, babes, that's all. Thank you for listening to my May wrap-up. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you have any suggestions for what I should read in the month of June. It probably won't be quite as full of a reading month as I'll be starting graduate school and taking a little vacation, not in that order, but I do really want to hear your suggestions. I truly hope that you are having a beautiful day, and that if you aren't, that you can find something in your day to be appreciative of. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Love you.